My name is Mara Quinn. I am 34 years old, and on a starless Sunday night in the tired cul-de-sac of Cinder Bay Estates, I was unlearning how to be a daughter. The kitchen where it happened was my mother's, but it had never felt less like home. It was a cold, sterile space smelling faintly of bleach and old regrets and the faint chemical tang of the HOA-approved, eco-friendly cleaning spray that every resident was required to use or face a $50 fine. The long fluorescent tube overhead flickered, erratically casting the room in strobing waves of harsh, unforgiving light. In one pulse, the linoleum floor was a jaundiced yellow. In the next, it was a sickly, morgue-like white. The hum from the ballast was the only sound, a low buzzing nerve in the hollow skull of the house. My mother Sable stood on the opposite side of the worn formica table. She looked at me not with the warmth of a mother or even the anger of a frustrated one, but with the flat, dispassionate gaze of a stranger assessing a problem. Her face, once a map I knew by heart, was now foreign territory. The lines around her mouth were drawn tight not with age but with the tension that seemed to pull her very features inward, shrinking her into someone I no longer recognized. She held a dish rag in her hands, twisting it, wringing out words she couldn't or wouldn't say. "Lose our number," she said. The sentence was not shouted. It was delivered in a quiet, steady tone that was far more brutal than any scream. It was a clinical severance, a surgical removal. I met her gaze across the flickering expanse. The air between us was thick and cold. I didn't ask why. I didn't plead. The time for questions had passed years ago, and the well of my pleading had run dry. There was a strange calm settling in my chest, a hollow space where a frantic, desperate heart used to be. "Okay," I replied. My voice was as level as hers, a simple transaction, a final agreement. From the darkened doorway leading to the living room, a shadow detached itself. Gordon Pike, my stepfather, moved into the light. He was a large man, built not with the solidness of muscle but with the dense weight of his own grievances. He carried his presence like a weapon. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the chipped porcelain mug sitting on the table, the one with the cheerful looping script that read "Community First." He didn't speak. He simply raised his hand, a thick, meaty fist, and brought it down on the table. The sound was a flat, explosive crack that obliterated the buzzing of the light. It was a sound of pure, artless violence. The table shuddered. The mug, a relic from a life that had never truly existed, jumped and then split with a clean, sharp ping. A hairline fracture, dark with coffee, raced from the rim to the base. I flinched, a purely reflexive motion, my body reacting before my mind did. But inside I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just the quiet, empty echo of the impact. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't fight. You can't reason with an earthquake. You just get out of the way of the rubble. I stood up. My chair scraped against the linoleum. The sound unnaturally loud in the ringing silence. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing good about it. I walked out of the kitchen, through the small, cluttered hallway, and to the front door. I could feel their eyes on my back, not as a tether but as a final severing push. Outside, the air was damp and cold, heavy with a smell of wet asphalt and decaying leaves mixed with the faint scent of freshly mowed lawns, all exactly 2 inches high per HOA Covenant Section 4.2. Felt clean. I got into my car, a sensible, reliable sedan that was the antithesis of everything this manicured prison represented. Before I even put the key in the ignition, I took out my phone. The screen's glow was a small private light in the oppressive Cinder Bay darkness. My fingers moved with methodical precision. I found my mother's contact block. I found his block. I went into my mail client and set up a forwarding address with the post office. Effective immediately, every digital and physical tie severed. It was a quiet, bloodless amputation. As I drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just another anonymous box on a dark street, the past began to unspool, not as a coherent narrative but as a series of disjointed sensory snapshots. I was 17 again, and the lock on my bedroom door was being turned from the outside, not with a key but with the small flathead screwdriver Gordon kept in his pocket for repairs. I could feel the remembered shame, the hot prickle of it on my skin, as his voice, thick with condescension, seeped through the wood, cataloging my failures, my inadequacies, my very existence as a disappointment to the community. He never laid a hand on me in a way that would leave a visible mark for others to question. But his words were fists leaving bruises on the inside on the parts of a person no one else ever sees. The memory was not a ghost. It was a permanent tenant in the architecture of my mind. A vow silent and absolute formed in the cold space of the car. It wasn't a thought but a certainty that settled deep in my bones, solid as bedrock. I would never set foot in that house again. I would never willingly place myself in the path of that man's shadow. I would never again stand in that flickering kitchen and be looked at like a stranger or like a rule breaker who dared question the HOA president's authority. The drive from Cinder Bay Estates to my new townhome 2 streets over in the same sprawling development took just under 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing a continent. With every mile, the weight in my chest lessened. I was driving toward my life, the one I had meticulously built for myself brick by boring stable brick at Vervain Community Management. The name itself sounded clean, precise. We were the property management firm that kept the HOA running. We dealt in data, in predictable patterns, in quantifiable threats. My title was Compliance Architect. It was my job to build the systems that kept things clean, to design the digital walls that prevented bad actors from getting in. I created order out of the potential for chaos. It was more than a job. It was a sanctuary. My office on the 34th floor of the Alderspire was a world of clean glass, brushed steel, and quiet, controlled logic. It was the complete and total opposite of my mother's kitchen. When I finally got out of my car in the parking garage of my new townhome, I noticed a strange smell clinging to my coat. It was the scent of rain, but not the earthy, clean scent of a natural storm. It was a sharp metallic odor like wet iron or ozone. It was the smell of a storm that was not of this world. A premonition that I couldn't yet decipher. It would linger for days and then it would return. Months later, when the real storm finally broke, I took the keys out of my pocket. The house key to my mother's place was still on the ring. I didn't throw it away. I unhooked it from the ring and slipped it into a small zippered compartment in my purse. I was leaving them, but I was taking the evidence with me. My memory wasn't just a collection of feelings. It was a living file, a chain of custody for every slight, every locked door, every cracked piece of porcelain. Each memory was documented, time-stamped, and archived. No one at Vervain knew about Sable or Gordon Pike. My life in the HOA was a carefully curated narrative. I was Mara Quinn, the efficient and slightly distant compliance architect, the one who was good with complex systems and even better at spotting hidden vulnerabilities. No one knew that my expertise came from a lifetime of practice. No one could have possibly known that the quiet final act of severance performed in a flickering kitchen in Cinder Bay Estates was not an ending. It was the lighting of a fuse. The ugly personal drama I had just walked away from was about to become the accelerant for a neighborhood explosion. And I would be standing at the epicenter holding the match. The air inside the Alderspire was different. It wasn't air you breathed. It was air you processed, filtered, temperature-controlled, and humming with the silent, frantic energy of a management firm about to make a very big bet on the next fiscal year. Vervain Community Management was in the final throes of courtship with a new round of investor funding. Series D. The 2 words hung in the recycled atmosphere like a holy mantra and a guillotine blade. It meant either explosive growth or a spectacular high-altitude flameout for the HOA contracts we managed. Our CEO, Ronan Vale, a man who wore his ambition like a bespoke suit, was hunting that growth with the single-minded focus of a starving predator. Every metric was a target, every department a weapon, and every employee a soldier in his war for a higher valuation. This meant that the normal pressures of HOA life were amplified to a shrieking pitch. The primary source of that pressure, for my department at least, was Marta Greer, the CFO. Marta operated with the brisk, unsentimental efficiency of an algorithm. To her, the world was a balance sheet and my work was a liability column labeled friction during the all-hands morning stand-up. Her voice cut through the nervous caffeine buzz. "We need to accelerate the Q4 pipeline." She'd set her eyes sweeping over the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on me. "That includes vendor onboarding. We have a crucial demo for the lead investors next week. We need our new partners integrated and operational. No delays." That was aimed directly at me. I am or was the compliance architect. The title sounds grander than the reality. In practice, I was the janitor for the HOA's soul. I built the digital infrastructure that was supposed to keep us honest. My magnum opus was a rigorous multi-stage vendor verification process codenamed Aperture. The unofficial motto which I'd put on the internal slide decks was clean onboarding, no gifts, no family. It was a system of checks and balances, a digital gauntlet that every potential contractor had to run. It scanned for conflicts of interest, bribery flags, shell corporations, and most importantly, any undisclosed personal relationships between a vendor's key personnel and our own board members or employees. It was designed to be slow, methodical, and impartial. In Ronan Vale's hypergrowth playbook, it was a bug, not a feature. My direct superior, the VP of Operations Caleb Knox, was the human embodiment of corporate equivocation. He was a master of the non-committal nod, the vague promise to circle back, the strategic decision to take it offline. In every meeting where I raised a flag pointing out a potential compliance issue with a vendor, Ronan was eager to sign. Caleb would cut me off with a placating hand gesture. Mara, valid points. Let's park that for now and stay focused on the macro goals. He wasn't a bad person, just a weak one terrified of carrying bad news into Ronan's office. He saw his job not as managing operations but as managing Ronan's moods, and my meticulously crafted compliance protocols were a frequent source of Ronan's irritation. Then came Harbor Field Services. The name appeared in my queue on a Tuesday morning with a priority flag I'd never seen before. It was a vendor specializing in community maintenance and landscaping, a key piece of the ecosystem we were demonstrating to the Series D investors. With the request came an email from Caleb forwarded from Marta. The subject line was simply expedite. The body was even simpler. Whitelist by end of day Friday. No exceptions. That was 72 hours. My standard Aperture process took a minimum of 2 weeks. I opened the file. It was thin. Dangerously thin, a Delaware incorporation certificate, a single-page website full of stock photos and vague promises of synergistic solutions, and a list of principles that contained only one name, no LinkedIn profiles, no industry footprint, nothing. It was a ghost. I started running the initial KYC protocols. Bank records were firewalled through a third-party payment processor, making it impossible to see the ultimate beneficial owner without a formal request that would take days. But the real problem was the W-9 form. The taxpayer identification number, the TIN, was incomplete. The last 4 digits were redacted, replaced with black block characters as if it had been sloppily edited in a cheap PDF program. Aperture screamed. A cascade of red flags bloomed on my dashboard. Incomplete KYC data. Potential obfuscation of ownership. High-risk vendor profile. An automated alert was sent to Caleb's inbox. 5 minutes later, he was at my desk. His face a mask of strained patience. He didn't sit. He loomed. Mara, I just got a system notification. What's the issue with Harborfield? I swiveled my monitor so he could see the dashboard. Their file is a shell. Caleb, we have no idea who these people are, and their tax ID is redacted. That's not just a red flag. It's a burning building. We can't onboard them like this. He sighed. A long theatrical exhalation of a man burdened by the small-mindedness of others. It's a new company. They're in stealth mode. Ronan has personally vetted them. That was the trump card. Ronan's blessing. It was meant to end the conversation. Ronan's vetting isn't a substitute for our legal and financial due diligence. I countered, keeping my voice low and even. That's the entire point of this system. A system you signed off on. Caleb's eyes flickered toward the glass walls of his office, as if he could feel Ronan's gaze from across the floor. Listen, he said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The demo is next Tuesday. This vendor's software is the centerpiece. If we flag this, Marta will kill it. The demo will be compromised and the entire Series D round could be jeopardized. Do you want to be the person who sinks the company over a typo on a form? It's not a typo, I said. It's a deliberate redaction. Then treat it as a typo. Just for now. Override the alert. Push them through. We can clean up the paperwork after the demo, after the term sheet is signed. Override it. I stared at him. He was asking me to personally manually dismantle the very system I had built to prevent this exact scenario. My name is on that override log. Caleb, if something goes wrong, it's my signature on the failure. And my name is on the success. He shot back, his whisper gaining a hard edge. I'm telling you as your superior to clear the alert. Don't make this a bigger issue than it needs to be. Don't spook the demo. He straightened up, his professional mask sliding back into place. I trust you'll handle it. He walked away, leaving the command hanging in the air. I sat there for a long moment, the red flags on my screen pulsing like a heartbeat. He had given me a direct order. Refusing it would mean immediate open warfare with him and by extension with Ronan and Marta. It was career suicide. But obeying felt like a deeper kind of betrayal. My fingers went to the keyboard. I navigated to the admin console. I found the alert for Harborfield Services. With a click, I silenced it. The angry red vanished, replaced by a placid, compliant green. But then I did something else. I opened a secondary command line, one that wasn't on any of the standard user interfaces, a backdoor I had built into the system for deep diagnostics. I typed a single command: log mode ego shadow verbose. It was a ghost protocol. It wouldn't show up on any standard audit trail, but it would now create a second encrypted immutable log of every single action, every keystroke, every data modification made to the Harborfield file from this moment forward. I was obeying the order, but I was also loading the gun. Later that evening, I rode the glass elevator down the side of the Alder Spire. The city of New Albion spread out below, a glittering web of light and motion. The elevator was a silent, transparent box falling through the sky. I looked at the reflections of the other passengers, their faces blank, tired, anonymous. I looked at my own reflection, a pale, still image against the dizzying backdrop of the city. A thought, cold and clear as the glass I was looking through, crystallized in my mind. If I'm right about this, if there is something rotten inside Harborfield, this whole thing, the company, the Series D, Ronan's ambition, is as fragile as this elevator. One critical flaw, one crack in the right place, and it all shatters and falls. I got off at the ground floor and walked out into the cool night air. The metallic smell of rain was on the wind again. I pulled out my phone, not to make a call, but to open a secure notes app. I created a new entry, timestamped and encrypted. Contained only 2 words. Harborfield, who is behind it? 2 months passed. Life settled into a new rhythm, a quiet cadence of work, home, and the blessedly empty space in between. The absence of my mother and Gordon was not a hole but a silence, a clean, uncluttered silence that I furnished with long hours at Vervain and evenings spent reading in my sterile new-build townhome. The townhome itself was a statement of my independence, anonymous, secure, and with no history. It was a place where no one had ever yelled, no doors had ever been locked from the outside, and no porcelain mugs sat waiting to be cracked while the HOA president lectured about community values. The disruption came on a Tuesday afternoon, not with a phone call or an email, but with the analog insistence of a knock on the door. It was the postal carrier, a woman whose face I barely recognized. She wasn't holding a bundle of junk mail. She held a single stiff envelope and a digital scanner. Certified for this address, she said, her tone flat with routine. Need a signature. I signed the screen with my finger. She handed me the envelope and left. Felt heavy in my hand. The paper thick and expensive. The return address was embossed in a severe serif font. Tolan Bray, attorneys at law. My heart gave a single hard thump. I knew no one at Tolan Bray. Then I looked at the address block and the floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. The laser-printed text was sharp and clear. Attention. Gordon Pike, DBA, Harborfield Services. My new correct apartment address. My new correct city, state, and zip code. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process the collision of those 3 lines of text: Gordon's name, the name of the ghost vendor from work, and my address, the one I had established as a fortress to keep him out. It made no sense. This wasn't a simple mail forwarding error from my mother's house that would have been rerouted or returned to sender. This was a direct primary mailing, a piece of official legal correspondence for him sent with absolute confidence to my front door. My first instinct was to write "return to sender" and drop it in the nearest mailbox. Opening mail not addressed to you is a federal crime, but I couldn't. This was not a random anomaly. This was a critical system error, and my entire life had become about finding and understanding system errors. I took the envelope inside my hands strangely steady and laid it on the cold granite of my kitchen counter. The name Harbor Field Services sat there, a snake coiled in my sanctuary. I slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife, the sound of the paper tearing unnaturally loud in the quiet townhome. My heart was a metronome ticking a steady cold rhythm. Inside were several documents clipped together. The top page was a letter on the law firm's heavy bond paper. It was an indemnity request, a standard piece of legal boilerplate. My eyes scanned the dense text, snagging on familiar words. Pursuant to the maintenance and implementation contract with our client Vervain Community Management for Cinder Bay Estates HOA. I stopped breathing. I read the sentence again and again. The air thickened. The low hum of the refrigerator behind me swelled to a roar. It was real. The phantom vendor, the one Caleb had forced through my system, was a contractor for the HOA, and they believed its proprietor Gordon Pike lived here. Beneath the letter was the evidence of how this impossible connection had been made. There was a scanned copy of a W-9 form, the one submitted to Vervain. And on the signature line, in a neat digitized script that was a grotesque parody of my own, were the words M. Quinn, a forgery, a clean, undeniable act of fraud sitting right there in Vervain's vendor file. He had signed my name. The next document was an old Form 1099 MISC from 7 years prior, bundled with an IRS notice of a secondary filing record. Took me a moment to understand. The 1099 was from a small landscaping supplier Gordon had done business with back then. The recipient's tax ID was not his own. It was my social security number. A cold dread, colder and deeper than any anger I had felt before, washed through me. 7 years ago, when I was 27 and had just moved out for the first time, naive and still caught in the gravitational pull of my mother's HOA world, he had stolen my identity. He had used my clean SSN to open a business profile, a shell that rode on my credit, my name, my very existence as a legal entity. That was why the letter had come to me. In the vast interconnected databases of the government and its satellite credit agencies, a part of Gordon Pike's financial identity was inextricably linked to mine. When he'd updated his DBA to Harbor Field Services, the system had likely cross-referenced the SSN, found my recent official change of address with the USPS, and automatically efficiently delivered his mail to my door. He had created a backdoor into my life years ago, and now it had delivered him right into my hands. The final pages were the most damning. They were recent bank statements for a corporate account under the name Harbor Field Services. It was a transaction history. For months, the account showed minimal activity, small deposits, service fees. Then, about 18 months ago, there was a sudden massive wire transfer, a deposit of $250,000. I recognized the date. It was within a week of Vervain closing its Series C funding round for HOA infrastructure upgrades. The pattern continued. A series of smaller structured payments followed, each one corresponding to a quarterly vendor payment cycle I knew from Vervain's own accounting system, and then a recent spike in activity, larger deposits corresponding perfectly with the push for our Series D. He wasn't just a vendor, he was a parasite feeding on the very lifeblood of the community I worked to protect. I stood there in the silent kitchen. The papers spread out on the counter like the autopsy of a crime. The pieces clicked into place with the cold final sound of a vault door locking. The rushed onboarding. Caleb's panic. The redacted tax ID on the W-9. It was my number they were hiding. The inexplicable confidence Ronan had in a ghost company. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed channel to siphon money out of the HOA dues and into my stepfather's pocket. And then I smelled it. Faint but unmistakable, the scent of metallic rain. It wasn't in the air. It was a memory. A phantom scent triggered by the collision of two worlds. The cold iron of his control. The ozone tang of an approaching storm. That night, driving away from Cinder Bay Estates, I had smelled the premonition. Now I was smelling the reality. It was the smell of cold hard steel, the smell of a weapon. The shock subsided, replaced by an unnerving calm. The fear and hurt were gone. In their place was a crystalline architectural clarity. This was no longer a messy, emotional family drama. He had made a fatal mistake. He had brought his particular brand of chaos into my world, the world of compliance, of data, of immutable logs and auditable trails. He thought he was playing a shell game, but he had just stepped onto a chessboard where I had designed every square. I didn't hesitate. I moved with the methodical purpose of my profession. I put on a jacket, gathered the documents, and walked to a 24-hour print shop. Under the sterile fluorescent lights, I used their high-resolution scanner to create a perfect digital copy of every single page. I saved the files to an encrypted USB drive. Then I made 3 full-color, high-quality paper copies. Back in my townhome, I worked for another hour. I purchased a box of archival-quality plastic sleeves and a simple, professional-looking document binder. I slid each copied page into its own protective sleeve, the original letter from Tolan Bray, the forged W-9, the 7-year-old 1099 with my social security number on it, the bank statements showing the flow of HOA money into his account. I was assembling a case file. I was establishing a chain of custody. The next morning, I carefully folded the original documents back into their envelope and sealed it with a piece of tape. When the postal carrier came on her route, I was waiting in the lobby of my building. "Excuse me," I said, holding out the letter. "This was delivered to my townhome yesterday by mistake. The name isn't anyone who lives here." She took it without a second glance. "Happens all the time," she mumbled, stuffing it into her bag. "We'll get it back to the sender." I watched her walk away, the original evidence now safely on its way back to the law firm that had sent it, leaving no trace that it had ever been in my possession. But in the locked briefcase in my townhome, I had something far more powerful. I had my own copy, documented, preserved, and ready. I didn't just have a secret anymore. I had proof. The evidence didn't burn a hole in my briefcase. Cooled it. Back at my desk on the 34th floor, surrounded by the hum of servers and the quiet ambition of Vervain Community Management, I felt a focus so sharp it was almost serene. Gordon hadn't just committed fraud. He had committed a tactical error. He had trespassed on my territory, a landscape of logical gates and conditional statements where I was the native and he was the clumsy intruder. My mind bypassed the anger, the betrayal, the remembered sting of his verbal abuse. It went straight to the system architecture, to the rules, specifically to a single elegant piece of code I had written and embedded deep within the Aperture Protocol a year ago. I called it the Reverse Exposure Clause Section 12, or RECC 12. It was born from a particularly tedious compliance seminar on third-party risk. While the presenter droned on, I had sketched out a kill switch. The logic was simple and brutal. Most compliance systems are designed to prevent bad vendors from getting in. RECC 12 was designed to punish the ones who lied and succeeded. The clause stated that if any active vendor was found to have an undeclared pre-existing personal or familial relationship with a Vervain employee, officer, or director, or with any board member of the managed HOA, a series of non-discretionary actions would be triggered. The first and most immediate was a hard freeze on all current and future payment streams to that vendor. Not a review, not a hold pending investigation, a freeze and instantaneous system-level cessation of cash flow. But the real teeth of RECC 12 wasn't the freeze. It was the payload it carried. What I privately called the auto-escalation pack. When triggered, the clause didn't just notify an internal manager. It was a digital trident programmed to fire 3 simultaneous encrypted communiques to 3 very specific external parties. The first went to the chairperson of Vervain's audit committee, a group of independent board members whose entire job was to provide oversight. The second went directly to our custodial bank, the institution that actually held our capital, with a legally binding instruction to execute the payment freeze. The third, and my personal favorite, went to our directors and officers' liability insurance carrier, flagging a potential claim and triggering their own risk mitigation protocols. It was a weapon of mutually assured destruction. It took the power to contain a scandal out of the hands of the people who might be involved in it. People like Ronan, Marta, or Caleb. It was designed to be an impartial force of nature, a corporate earthquake that once started could not be stopped. I remember the day I presented it to Ronan. He had been in a rush, eager to get to a lunch with a potential investor. I framed it as a mark of unparalleled corporate governance. "It's a selling point, Ronan," I had explained, keeping my language focused on valuation. "It tells investors that our internal controls are so robust. They're automated. It's a trust signal, a sign of maturity. He had barely looked at the technical specs. He saw the words trust signal and investors and nodded. Good, proactive. Make it happen. He signed the policy update without reading the fine print, believing he was simply adding another gold star to his report card. He never imagined that the policy wasn't just designed to catch a hypothetical bad actor. It was a trap baited with his own ambition. Now sitting at my desk with the scanned documents from Gordon's misdelivered letter on a hidden partition of my hard drive, I pulled up the live Harbor Field Services vendor file. I scrolled down to the disclosure section, the part of the form every vendor had to digitally sign before being on board. My eyes landed on question 12A. Do you or any principals of your company have any familial or significant personal relationship with any current employee, director, or officer of Vervain Community Management, or any board member of the managed HOA? The checkbox next to no was ticked. The digital signature beneath it was the forged M. Quinn. The timestamp was from 2 months ago, the day Caleb had ordered me to override the system. That check mark was the tripwire. The false declaration was the breach of contract. The trigger for RECC 12 was armed and waiting. I didn't activate it yet. A weapon this precise required a complete target profile. The misdelivered letter gave me Gordon. The system logs gave me Caleb, who had personally approved the override. But that wasn't enough. The speed and aggression with which Harborfield had been pushed through the system felt like it had more energy behind it than just Caleb's spinelessness. There was another piece missing. I opened a proprietary analytics tool I had built for myself, something the rest of the company didn't know existed. I called it Vendor Graph. It was a visual relationship mapping software that ingested data from our internal systems, emails, meeting invitations, approval logs, expense reports, and cross-referenced it with public databases to create a visual web of connections. It was designed to spot collusion and undisclosed conflicts of interest. I created a new node and labeled it Gordon Pike. I uploaded the details from the 1099 linking his name to my stolen SSN. Then I created another node for Harborfield Services and linked it to Gordon as the sole proprietor. The system instantly connected Harborfield to the Vervain ecosystem, drawing a thick red line to the approver Caleb Knox. So far it was exactly as I expected, but then I expanded the parameters, telling the system to look for secondary and tertiary connections no matter how faint. I told it to analyze metadata communication patterns, anything that linked Caleb or Harborfield to the executive level. The graph churned for a moment, nodes shifting and reforming, and then a new faint dotted line appeared. It branched off from Harborfield, not to anyone in operations or finance, but to a name that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. Ivy Vale. Ivy Vale, Ronan Vale's wife. She held no official position at Vervain, but she was a constant polished presence at HOA functions, the picture of supportive old money elegance. Her name should not have been anywhere near a vendor file. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was the missing energy source. I pivoted from my internal systems to the public domain. I went straight to the Delaware Division of Corporations online registry, the digital birthplace of so many opaque corporate structures. I started searching for Ivy Vale. Took less than 5 minutes to find her. She wasn't listed as an officer of Harborfield, but her name appeared as a managing member of a private equity fund. I had never heard of Northwine Holdings LLC. My next search was for Northwine Holdings. I pulled their public incorporation documents. It was a holding company, a legal box designed to own other things. I cross-referenced its portfolio holdings against our vendor list. I initiated a deeper search, a subscription-level query that cost a few hundred on my personal credit card to pull its latest SEC filings and statements of ownership. The result came back in minutes, a PDF document dense with legalese. I scrolled to Schedule B, the list of major assets, and there it was. The fourth item on the list. Northwine Holdings held a 40% equity stake in a small private maintenance firm. The firm was Harborfield Services. I leaned back in my chair. The chain of custody now complete in my mind. The chain of conspiracy. Gordon was the front, the crude operator on the ground. But the scheme ran all the way to the top. The money being siphoned from HOA dues wasn't just enriching my stepfather. It was flowing into a fund partially owned by the CEO's wife. This wasn't just Caleb covering his own hide. This was a coordinated high-level fraud orchestrated from within the executive suite. Ronan wasn't just hunting for growth. He was using the management firm as his personal piggy bank, with my stepfather as his willing complicit instrument and my own mother, the HOA president, turning a blind eye while preaching community standards. My breath was steady. My hands were still. The rage I should have felt was absent, replaced by the profound, ice-cold satisfaction of a complex equation resolving to a single perfect answer. I began my final preparation. I compiled my findings into a single seamless report. The vendor graph visualization showing the connections: Gordon to Harborfield to Caleb Harborfield to Northwine Holdings Northwine to Ivy Vale. I appended the scans of the Misdelivered letter, the forged W-9, the bank statements. I attached the Delaware registry printouts for Ivy and Northwine. I documented the exact time and nature of Caleb's override command. I printed 3 complete copies on the high-quality color laser printer in the marketing department. I walked them over to the mailroom and used the timestamp clock, the kind used for logging incoming legal documents, to stamp the current date and time on the first page of each copy. 16:52 Thursday. I now had 3 physical timestamp dossiers of the entire conspiracy. 1 for my records, the other 2 for the right audience. The trap was no longer just a theory, a piece of code buried in a server. It was now a physical object. It was built, baited, and locked. All that was left was to choose the precise, perfect moment to let the door slam shut. With the evidence secure and the strategy coalescing in my mind, the time for passive observation was over. It was time to lay the final wire. A conspiracy this elaborate, protected by the highest levels of the company, couldn't be brought down by a report alone. Reports can be buried, discredited, explained away. I needed to create an active, undeniable event. I needed them to commit a fresh crime, a small one, right before my eyes. I needed a tracer. On Friday morning, I began to construct my bait. I created a new invoice from a template, making it look like a standard, slightly amateurish bill from a small contractor. The vendor was, of course, Harborfield Services. The service rendered was deliberately vague but corporate-sounding: Q4 Synergy Integration Consulting Phase 2. The amount was carefully chosen, $2,480. It was small enough to be considered a miscellaneous operational expense, not large enough to require a second or third level of executive sign-off beyond the designated project manager. It was designed to be overlooked. A single drop of water in a river of expenditures. But this drop of water was different. Before I saved the invoice as a PDF, I embedded my watermark. It wasn't a visual mark but a digital one, a tiny string of custom encrypted hexadecimal code hidden within the file's metadata. It was completely invisible to any user, but my system was programmed to recognize it. Once that invoice was uploaded and processed, its unique marker would act as a beacon. I could track its movement through every server, every approval queue, and most importantly, every payment gateway. It was a digital die pack, and I was about to slip it into their hands. I logged into the vendor payment portal not as myself but through a sandboxed admin terminal that would mask my activity. I uploaded the invoice under Harborfield's vendor profile, making it look like a routine submission. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 6 minutes. That's how long it took for the approval notification to register in the system. 6 minutes after the invoice was submitted, Caleb Knox from his desk across the office digitally signed off on the payment. He didn't question the vague service description. He didn't look for a corresponding purchase order which didn't exist. He didn't even open the file. The system logs, my secret verbose logs, showed that the PDF was never rendered on his machine. He saw the name Harborfield and he hit approve. It was the careless, confident act of a man who believes he is above the rules. The payment was now queued in the accounts payable system, scheduled for release in the next 24-hour cycle. My part was done. All I had to do was watch the tracer. The next afternoon, the system showed the $2,480 had been dispersed. The money left Vervain's main custodial account in a single clean transaction. Now came the critical phase. I had previously and unofficially written a script that gave me read-only access to the transaction logs of our payment processor. Privilege far beyond my job description. I watched the unique transaction ID associated with my bait invoice. I saw it hit the intermediary bank, and then something interesting happened. The single payment of $2,480 did not arrive in Harborfield's listed account. Instead, it was split. A payment of $1,500 was routed to one account and a second payment of $980 to another. It was a classic clumsy attempt at invoice laundering, breaking up a payment to obscure its origin and make the deposits look like unrelated transactions. They were trying to hide a payment that was already designed to be hidden. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. I traced the two destination accounts. The first, the one that received the $1,500, was the main Harborfield Services account I'd seen in the Misdelivered bank statements, but the second one, the one that received the $980, was new. The account holder was a limited liability company I'd never seen before, Pike Sons Custodial. A quick public records search confirmed my suspicion. The registered agent for this LLC was Gordon Pike. The address on file was a P.O. box in Cinder Bay Estates. The same P.O. box where he had his personal mail delivered for years. He wasn't just using a shell company. He was using a nested doll of shell companies, skimming nearly 40% of his already fraudulent earnings into a secondary, even more obscure entity. This was it. The final active link, a direct real-time flow of HOA money into a custodial account owned and operated exclusively by Gordon Pike, approved by Caleb Knox, all under the protective umbrella of Ronan and Ivy Vale. I opened the Aperture admin console. I navigated to the manual override controls for RECC 12. I keyed in the vendor ID for Harborfield Services and selected the primary trigger condition, breach of disclosure policy 12A. But I didn't click execute. I clicked ARM. The system status for the clause shifted from dormant to pending manual execution. The kill switch was now live. The circuit was closed. All that was needed was the pressure of my finger on the button. The next step was to set the stage. I couldn't just email a dossier and hope for the best. I needed to control the room. I opened my calendar and composed a new meeting invitation. The attendees were the three external members of the Vervain Audit Committee, a retired judge, a forensic accountant from a Big Four firm, and a veteran tech CEO. These were serious people who valued process and abhorred surprises. The subject line was neutral and professional. Urgent review of vendor onboarding protocol discrepancies. The time I selected was specific, designed to be slightly jarring. Tuesday morning, 9:04 a.m. Attached to the invitation was a password-protected zip file. The file was labeled Packet of Pre-Read Materials. It contained a carefully curated selection of the evidence. I included a copy of the official Ronan-approved RECC 12 policy. I included the full immutable shadow log of Caleb's forced override of the Harborfield application. I included the public record printouts from the Delaware Registry showing the corporate structure of Northwine Holdings and its ownership of Harborfield. It was the entire case presented in the dry, impersonal language of corporate governance. It showed the what, the how, and the when, but it didn't show the who. I kept the most volatile evidence for myself. The Misdelivered letter, the scans of the forged W-9 with my name on it, the 7-year-old 1099 proving my identity had been stolen. The vendor chart that explicitly drew the line from Gordon Pike to Ivy Vale. This was Packet B. Packet A was the kindling. Packet B was the accelerant. I would deliver it in person. After sending the meeting invitation, I took the 3 time-stamped paper dossiers I had printed. I placed 2 of them in my fireproof briefcase. I slid the third one, my personal copy, into the bottom drawer of my locked filing cabinet at my desk. On top of it, I placed a single small sticky note. I wrote 3 words on it in my neat architectural script. Proof survives noise. It was a promise to myself. I locked the cabinet and stood up. It was late and the office was nearly empty. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the city lights blurring. It had started to rain. Thick sheets of water sliding down the glass. The sky was the color of bruised steel. I walked to the window and placed my hand on the cool glass. The metallic smell of rain, the one that had clung to my coat that night in Cinder Bay Estates, filled my memory. Then it had felt like a cold premonition, a scent of dread. But now standing here armed with my packets and my pending kill switch, I felt no cold at all. The rain outside was just water. The real storm was the one I was about to unleash, and I was its calm, quiet center. Tuesday morning arrived with the artificial brightness of a stage light. The 38th floor of the Alderspire home to Vervain's executive suites and main conference rooms was buzzing with a carefully manufactured energy. The air smelled of expensive coffee and low-grade panic masked by a veneer of professional confidence. This was demo day. The lead investors for the Series D round were here, a collection of men and women with quiet voices and eyes that could calculate a company's burn rate from a handshake. Our CEO, Ronan Vale, was in his element. He moved through the lobby like a statesman. His smile perfectly calibrated, his handshakes firm but not aggressive. He was selling the future, and today he was the flawless embodiment of it. Gliding in his wake but never too close was Ivy Vale. She was a vision of detached elegance in a silk blouse the color of cream. Her presence a subtle but potent endorsement. She spoke to no one about business. Yet her being there was a signal in itself. The family was invested. The foundation was solid. She drifted through the crowd, a beautiful serene ghost, her hands never touching anything, her expression a placid mask of support. She had mastered the art of being present and invisible at the same time. I carried my briefcase, the one containing packet B, and made my way toward the elevators that led to the upper conference floors. My meeting with the audit committee was in the smaller boardroom on 42. The investor demo was in the main amphitheater on 38. 4 floors of vertical separation that might as well have been a universe. As I approached the elevator bank, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, intercepting me. It was Caleb Knox. His face was pale, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that his expensive haircut couldn't hide. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, a man who had seen the 9:04 a.m. meeting invitation and understood its implications. He blocked my path, forcing me to stop a few feet from the elevator doors. "Mara," he said, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "What are you doing? I saw the meeting invite. You have to cancel it." I said nothing. I looked past him at the illuminated arrow indicating an approaching elevator. "Listen to me," he pleaded, taking a half step closer. "Ronan is about to close the deal of a lifetime. This isn't just about a vendor. This deal saves the company. It saves all of our jobs. You can't just throw a grenade into the middle of it. Take down the red flag. We can sort out the Harborfield paperwork later. I'll take care of it myself." The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. It was one of the express glass elevators, a transparent capsule that ran up the building's exterior. I stepped inside. Caleb followed, standing too close, his desperation palpable, heat in the confined space. The doors closed, sealing us in. "Take it down, Mara," he repeated, his voice cracking. "For the good of the company." I turned to face him for the first time. I looked at his reflection in the glass, a distorted, frightened man superimposed over the sprawling grid of the city below. "The flag only falls when the wind is clean, Caleb," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. His face contorted in a flash of anger and fear. "You're going to regret this," he snarled. The elevator chimed and the doors opened on the 40th floor. As Caleb stepped out, another figure stepped in. Marta Greer. She looked at Caleb's retreating back, then at me. She waited for the doors to close again, encasing us in our silent upward journey. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were like chips of ice. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the changing floor number. "But I know you're smart enough to understand what a term sheet is. We are on the 1-yard line. Whatever petty compliance issue you think you found, it is not more important than the survival of this company. Don't be the person who blows up a $100 million deal because of a missing form. Don't make this nuclear." I met her gaze in the reflection. She looked steely, resolute, a soldier defending her king. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reply. I simply watched the city fall away beneath us. The doors opened on 42. I stepped out, leaving her alone in the glass box. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in a thick, sound-dampening gray. The door to the boardroom was closed. I looked at my watch. 9:01 a.m. My heart was a steady, even pulse. A metronome setting the tempo for what was to come. I wasn't nervous. I was an architect about to conduct a scheduled demolition. All the charges had been set. All the calculations had been made. There was a clean mathematical certainty to it all. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A notification on the lock screen from our encrypted messaging app. It was from the audit committee chair, the retired judge. The message was 2 words. Ready. I unlocked the phone and typed my reply, my thumb steady. Ready. I put the phone away. The door in front of me seemed to hum with the weight of the moment. I took a breath. The polished wood floors of the lobby on 38 were a stage, but this was the tribunal. The stage was for performance. This room was for consequences. I thought of the floor downstairs gleaming under the recessed lighting, a perfect slick surface. Someone was about to slip. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. The 3 committee members were already seated around the long mahogany table, laptops open. They were older, their faces etched with the kind of experience that made them immune to corporate charm. They looked at me expectantly. At the head of the table, in his customary seat, was Ronan Vale. He had clearly been pulled away from the main event, and his irritation was a palpable force field. He was on his phone firing off a text. He looked up as I entered, his expression one of supreme annoyance. He didn't even acknowledge the committee members. His focus was entirely on me, the irritant who had dared to disrupt his glorious day. I walked to the table and placed my briefcase on the floor beside me. From it I took one of the dossier packet. I placed it gently on the table in front of the chairperson. The gesture was deliberate, quiet. Ronan snapped his phone shut and tossed it onto the table. It clattered on the polished wood. "All right, Mara," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "The adults are trying to close a financing round that will define the future of this company. You have 3 minutes to explain why this couldn't have been an email. Make it quick." The committee members shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Waiting. All eyes were on me. The weight of Ronan's power, Caleb's fear, and Marta's warning pressed in. I could hear the faint, ticking sound of the metronome in my chest. I looked directly at Ronan. His arrogance was his final critical error. He saw me as a speed bump. He had no idea he was looking at a brick wall. I met his impatient glare and held it. "I only need one," I said. My single minute began. I did not address Ronan. I addressed the committee. "Thank you for joining on short notice," I said, my voice even and devoid of emotion. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projector. The screen behind Ronan's head, which moments before had been displaying the Vervain corporate logo, flickered to life with a mirror of my desktop. It was a clean, uncluttered display. There was only one window open, the admin console for the Aperture system, my system. A single dialog box was centered on the screen. Vendor ID HV73381. Harbor Field Services status. Red flag override active. C. Knox admin policy breach. Disclosure protocol 12A. Action. RECC 12. Armed. Awaiting manual execution. Beneath the text were 2 large simple buttons. Execute and cancel. Ronan stared at the screen. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by irritation. He didn't understand the specifics, but he understood the challenge to his authority. "What is this, Mara? Some kind of systems theater?" I ignored him. My hand was on the mouse. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the HVAC system. I moved the cursor over the execute button. It glowed a faint blue. I looked at the chairperson, the retired judge. Her face was a neutral mask, her eyes missing nothing. I clicked the mouse. The click was a small, dry sound, but it seemed to echo off the glass walls. On the screen, the dialog box vanished, replaced by a simple confirmation. RECC 12 executed. 9:04 and 17 seconds AM. Nothing visible happened in the room, but I knew what was happening in the digital world. I could almost hear the silent scream of data moving at the speed of light. 3 encrypted packets of information. The contents of packet A were now leaving our servers. One was traveling to the custodial bank's compliance department. One was heading to the D&O insurance carrier's legal intake, and the third was already arriving in the inboxes of the three people sitting at this table. It was done. The failsafe I had built a year ago had just fired its 3 arrows. They could not be recalled. Ronan started to speak, a furious, dismissive retort forming on his lips. Of all the irresponsible, I cut him off by opening a new file. The projected image changed. It was the vendor graph. It appeared on the screen as a clean, elegant web of interconnected nodes. At the center was a box labeled Vervain Community Management. Branching from it was Harborfield Services flagged in red. A solid line connected Harborfield to its approver Caleb Knox. So far it was just an internal issue. Then I expanded the view. Another node appeared. Northwine Holdings LLC, and a thick weighted line connected it to Harborfield. Labeled 40% equity stake. The air in the room grew heavy. This was no longer just an operational problem. This was a financial conflict of interest. I expanded the view one final time. A new node materialized. Branching from Northwine Holdings, the line was labeled 12% beneficial owner. The name inside the node was Simple Ivyvale. The name hung in the air, projected in crisp black letters on the 12-foot screen behind the CEO's head. Ronan's face, which had been flushed with anger, went slack. The color drained from it, leaving a pasty gray pallor. A single muscle in his jaw jumped, a tiny involuntary spasm. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at the door, a quick darting glance, as if he expected Ivy to materialize and explain it all away, but the door remained closed. He was alone. The forensic accountant on the committee leaned forward slightly. His eyes narrowed, absorbing the data structure with professional appreciation. The judge remained perfectly still. I spoke into the silence, my words precise and measured, each one a separate, carefully placed stone. The vendor onboarding file for Harborfield Services contains a signed declaration stating that no familial or significant personal relationship exists with any employee, director, or officer of this company, or any board member of the managed HOA. I paused, letting the statement settle. This is a material misrepresentation, a falsehood submitted to the company for financial gain, a fraud. My hands went to my briefcase. I pulled out the second dossier, packet B, and laid it on the table. It made a soft, solid sound on the polished mahogany. I slid it across the surface. It glided smoothly, coming to a stop directly in front of the chairperson. "This is the supporting documentation," I said. The judge opened the binder. He didn't rush. He turned the first page, revealing the scanned copy of the Misdelivered letter from Tolan Bray, addressed to Gordon Pike, DBA, Harborfield Services, at my personal address. He turned the next page, the forged W-9 with the blocky, unfamiliar signature M. Quinn. He lingered on that page, then looked at me. A silent question in his eyes. I answered it for the entire room. Gordon Pike is my stepfather. The room didn't just go quiet. It went dead. The air seemed to crystallize. Ronan's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. For the first time, he was seeing me not as a compliance drone, not as a bureaucratic obstacle, but as a person connected to the grubby little secret he thought he had buried under layers of corporate entities. He was looking at the living, breathing proof of his crime. In that frozen moment, my phone, which was sitting face down on the table, began to vibrate. The muffled buzz was an obscene intrusion. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID was Stark. "Mom." My thumb moved, pressing the silence button on the side of the phone. The vibration stopped. I did not accept the call. I did not decline it. I simply muted it. A problem to be dealt with later or never. I drew the room's focus back to me, my voice cutting through the last vestiges of shock. I spoke directly to the audit committee, but my eyes were locked on Ronan's. As per the Reverse Exposure Clause Section 12 of the Corporate Governance Policy signed and ratified by the CEO, I stated, my voice like ice, the discovery of a fraudulent disclosure of this nature triggers a non-discretionary immediate freeze on all payment streams to the vendor in question. I let the words hang there. The mechanism, the breach, the consequence, a clean logical progression. Ronan finally found his voice. A strangled, desperate sound. This is a setup, a family dispute she's bringing into the workplace. Mr. Vale, the judge interrupted. His voice was soft, but it carried the immense, unyielding weight of the law. He had not taken his eyes off the documents in Packet B. Please be silent. Ronan's mouth snapped shut. The forensic accountant let out a long, slow breath, a quiet hiss of air. My God, he murmured, not to anyone in particular, but to the sheer, elegant audacity of the scheme laid out before him. The judge looked up from the dossier, his gaze moving from me to Ronan and then to his two colleagues on the committee. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a verdict. He then looked at me. The policy is clear, he said, his voice a flat declaration of fact. The action is executed. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. A judicial stamp on the button I had already pressed. The trap had closed. The process was now irreversible. The machine I had built was functioning perfectly. The judge's confirmation landed in the room with the finality of a gavel strike. For a moment Ronan Vale seemed to deflate. The sheer, unexpected velocity of his downfall stunning him into silence. But it was only a moment. The survival instinct of a cornered predator took over and his shock curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. His power had been challenged, and his only known response was to assert it brutally and absolutely. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a mask of purple fury. You're fired, he roared, the sound bouncing off the glass walls of the boardroom. The carefully constructed civility of the meeting shattered. This was not business. It was a raw, primal assertion of dominance. You are fired. Security! He bellowed toward the intercom on the conference phone. Get up to the 42nd floor boardroom now. Escort Ms. Quinn from the building. Take her badge. Take everything. I did not flinch. I did not argue. My calmness was a shield. He could not penetrate a language he did not understand. While his voice was still echoing in the silent room, I reached to the lanyard around my neck. With a slow, deliberate motion, I unclipped my employee identification badge. The plastic card with my picture and the Vervain logo felt like a relic from another lifetime. I placed it gently on the polished table next to Packet B. It made a soft plastic click, a quiet declarative sound of surrender that was in fact a statement of total victory. His order was meaningless. The auto-escalation pack, my digital ghost, had been sent before the word fired had fully left his mouth. He was trying to shut a door that had already been blown off its hinges. As if on cue, a soft chime emanated from the chairperson's laptop. The judge glanced down at his screen. He adjusted his glasses and read the email preview in a flat, dispassionate monotone that cut through Ronan's residual fury. This is an automated notification from Northern Trust, our custodial bank. It confirms, and I quote, pursuant to an authorized RECC 12 directive payment stream for vendor HV73381 Harborfield Services, has been placed on indefinite administrative hold. Effective immediately. Timestamped 9:05 and 31 seconds AM. Another chime. This one from the forensic accountant's machine. And this, he said, a note of grim fascination in his voice, is from AIG, our D&O carrier. They are opening a file reference number 774B. The file is titled, Potential Claim Regarding Director and Officer Conduct. Ronan stared, his mouth slightly agape. He was watching his authority evaporate in real time, superseded by automated protocols he didn't understand and external forces he could not control. He was the king of this castle, but I had just demonstrated that the castle's foundations were wired to a switch in my hand. He turned to the judge, his voice a desperate rasp. This is a corporate ambush, a fabrication. This requires legal review. I agree, a new voice said. The voice came from a man sitting quietly in the corner of the room, a man Ronan had clearly dismissed as a junior associate or a notary. He was dressed in a conservative gray suit and had been silent until this exact moment. He now closed the leather-bound notebook in his lap. David Sterling, he said, his voice carrying the easy, unshakable confidence of a litigator who bills by the minute. Outside counsel for the audit committee from Sidley Austin. Ronan's head swiveled between the lawyer and me, confusion warring with horror. I provided the final piece for him. I took the liberty of including Mr. Sterling on the original meeting invitation. I explained to the room. I anticipated that an immediate independent legal interpretation of corporate policy might be required. The trap was not just the data. It was the room itself. I hadn't just brought the evidence. I had brought the judge, the jury, and the executioner. At that moment, from somewhere downstairs, a commotion could be heard. A frantic energy was bleeding through the corporate calm. Ivy Vale suddenly appeared at the glass door. Her serene mask shattered, her face pale with panic. She slid the door open and rushed to Ronan's side. She had clearly been alerted that the demo downstairs was being overshadowed by a crisis upstairs. She saw the diagram on the screen with her name on it. She saw the grim faces of the committee. She saw the badge on the table. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met Ronan's. She leaned in. Her voice a frantic whisper, a sound not meant for anyone else but one that I, sitting only feet away, heard with perfect clarity. "Ronan, let me call Northwine," she hissed. "I can have them divest. We can unwind it before the wire transfer." It was a confession, a panicked, instinctive admission of control, of guilt, of the very conspiracy I had just exposed. "That may be difficult," I said, my voice cutting through her whisper. I reached into my briefcase one last time. I had held this back. It was my checkmate. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table. It was another printout from the Delaware Division of Corporations website, but this one was different. It was from a deeper, more specific search, and it was time-stamped at the top, 7:12 a.m. "This morning. This filing clarifies the ownership structure of Northwine Holdings," I announced to the committee. I tapped the relevant line highlighted in yellow. Ivy Vale is not just a managing member or a minority partner. She is listed as the LLC's sole beneficial owner. The distinction was a legal kill shot. It wasn't a stake. It was her fund. It wasn't a conflict of interest. It was a private pipeline. To seal it, I switched the projector's input. The vendor graph vanished, replaced by a screenshot of an email. The email from Caleb Knox to me. The words appeared stark and damning on the screen for everyone to see. "Turn off the alarm so we don't spook the demo." The evidence was now complete. The scheme, the cover-up, the motive, the actors. Ronan looked at me, his face a ruin. The rage was gone, replaced by the hollow look of total defeat. But the instinct was still there. He had one move left, the only one he knew. Raw power. "I don't care," he snarled, his voice low and shaking. "You are still fired. You are finished." I met his gaze, the metronome in my chest perfectly still, my armor of calm absolute. "What you just did," I said, my voice clear and steady, firing me in the presence of the audit committee and its counsel immediately following my presentation of a protected disclosure, has a legal definition. It is called retaliation. I let the words settle in the suddenly frigid air. "My personal attorney," I continued, "has already forwarded a full copy of Packet B along with a sworn affidavit detailing the events of this meeting to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of the Whistleblower. Another copy has been sent to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Your attempt to terminate me has just been logged as Exhibit A in a federal retaliation claim." The glass walls of the boardroom no longer seemed like windows. They seemed like the transparent sides of a cage. The air grew thick and heavy, as if the oxygen was being slowly bled from the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the muffled buzz started again. My phone, still face down on the table, vibrating against the wood. "Mom." I reached over and silenced it, my thumb pressing down until the vibration ceased. The storm I had unleashed was contained within this room, and I would not allow a single echo from the world I'd left behind to intrude. The aftermath of my retaliation statement was not chaos. It was a vacuum. All the air, all the bluster, all the power Ronan Vale had commanded was sucked out of the room, leaving behind a cold, ringing silence. He stood there, a man unplugged, his authority rendered null and void by a force he had never bothered to understand, his own company's policies. The clock on the conference room wall, a minimalist circle of brushed steel, became the only thing that mattered. Its slender second hand swept forward with an indifferent mechanical grace. Each tick was a hammer blow dismantling the world Ronan had built. 10:26 a.m. A third notification chimed, this time from the laptop of the third committee member, the veteran tech CEO. He had been the quietest, his face unreadable, but now he spoke, his voice carrying the weary authority of someone who had seen dozens of companies rise and fall. A second notification from Northern Trust, he announced, reading from his screen. This is a level 1 asset freeze effective immediately. All accounts associated with vendor HV73381 are frozen. This includes the primary account for Harborfield Services, all known subsidiary accounts, and, he paused, looking directly at where Ivy stood frozen beside her husband, any accounts held by the holding company Northwine LLC. The vendor stream is locked. Nothing goes in, nothing comes out. It was a financial decapitation. The flow of money, the lifeblood of the entire scheme, had been severed at the source. Ivy made a small, almost inaudible sound, a tiny gasp of air. She instinctively reached for her husband's arm, but then her hand stopped hovering in the empty space between them. There was nothing left to hold on to. 10:28 a.m. The forensic accountant who had been typing rapidly stopped. He turned his laptop so the chairperson could see. I have engaged our external audit partners at Deloitte, he stated. They are initiating a full forensic review of all transactions related to Harborfield Services and any associated entities. The look-back period will be 18 months retroactive to the initial Series C investment. He looked at Ronan, his expression not unkind but utterly implacable. They will find everything, Ronan. Every transfer, every invoice, every dollar. An 18-month digital excavation. An army of accountants was about to descend upon their carefully constructed lies, and they would not stop until they had unearthed every last secret. Ronan seemed to shrink before our eyes. The illusion of the Titan CEO, the visionary leader, was gone. He was just a man in an expensive suit trapped in a glass room about to be buried under the weight of his own history. 10:30 a.m. The chairperson, the retired judge, finally closed the binder containing Packet B. He had seen enough. He folded his hands on top of it, a gesture of finality. He did not look at me. He looked only at the man who had until 10 minutes ago been his boss. Ronan, the judge said, his voice quiet but carrying the force of a command. Leave the room. It was not a request. Ronan stared at him, a flicker of his old defiant arrogance trying to light in his eyes. He opened his mouth to protest, to argue, to remind them who he was, but no words came out. He looked at the faces around the table, the impassive judge, the methodical accountant, the weary CEO. There was no support here, no quarter. He had lost the room. He had lost the company. He turned, his movement stiff and robotic, and walked toward the door. 10:31 a.m. As Ronan passed her, Ivy did not look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the polished surface of the mahogany table, as if it were a deep, dark pool of water she was about to fall into. Her hands, which had been clutching her expensive leather purse, moved with a strange, dreamlike slowness. She twisted the large, ornate diamond ring on her left hand. The ring Ronan had given her, a symbol of their partnership, their success, their shared life. With a final, decisive movement, she pulled it from her finger. The diamond caught the light, throwing a final fractured rainbow across the table. She did not look at it. She opened her purse, dropped the ring inside, and snapped it shut. The click of the clasp was the only sound. It was an abdication, a quiet, unilateral dissolution of an alliance. She would face what was coming next alone. No one in the room moved to comfort her. No one touched her. She stood in a perfect self-imposed isolation. 10:32 a.m. I turned my laptop back toward the projector. I navigated away from the email evidence and brought up a real-time dashboard from our accounts payable system. On the screen, a simple line graph depicted Vervain's cash outflow to its vendor network. The line was steady, a healthy, continuous stream of capital. Then, at the far right of the graph, the line dropped. It did not dip. It did not curve. Fell off a cliff. A sheer vertical drop from millions of dollars per hour to a flat absolute zero. The payment portal was locked. The system was now enforcing the freeze. The company's financial heart was still beating, but the secret cancerous artery had been clamped shut. The graph was a flat line. A digital death. My phone, which had been silent for several minutes, vibrated once more on the table. A final weak pulse. I picked it up. The screen glowed with the evidence of a world outside this room. A world that now seemed impossibly distant. Mom call. 3 attempts. 3 desperate signals sent from the past trying to breach the walls of my present. I pictured her in that flickering kitchen, Gordon yelling in the background, the broken mug still on the counter. She had made her choice. She had told me to lose her number. I placed the phone face down on the table, the screen going dark. My gaze lifted to the far glass wall of the boardroom. I could see my own reflection, a calm, still figure against the backdrop of the city. Reflected in the glass superimposed over my face was the etched Vervain Analytics logo from the door. The two images merged. I spoke, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for the record, for the lawyers, for the history that would be written of this day. You all signed the policy, I said, looking at the committee members. Today the policy saved the company. It was not a boast. It was a system diagnostic, a statement of fact. Outside the window, the sky, which had been a uniform gray, finally broke. The first drops of rain began to fall, streaking down the vast panes of glass. And with the rain, the smell returned, that strange, sharp scent of metal. But it was different this time. It wasn't the ozone smell of an approaching storm, of something dangerous and unknown. This was the clean, cold smell of finished steel, the scent of a well-oiled deadbolt sliding securely into place, the sound of a latch finally clicking shut. The room was a tableau of ruin. Ronan was gone, but his ghost, a phantom of impotent rage and shattered authority, still hung in the air. Ivy stood as if she had been turned to marble, her hand still resting on the purse that now held her wedding ring, a tiny diamond-hard coffin. The committee members were no longer just observers. They were now the primary actors, the custodians of a company suddenly without a head. My work here was finished. I reached for the binder on the table, packet B. My hand was perfectly steady. I opened it to the first page, the page with the scanned copy of the Misdelivered letter, the catalyst for everything, the piece of paper that had brought Gordon's world crashing into mine, and in doing so had given me the key to dismantle his. I looked at his name, at the name of his phantom company, and felt nothing, not hatred, not satisfaction, just the quiet final click of a process completed. I closed the binder. I slid it back into my briefcase and fastened the 2 brass clasps. The sound was soft, but in the profound silence of the room it was as definitive as a judge's gavel. At the glass door 2 uniformed security guards stood waiting. They had clearly been summoned by Ronan's furious final command. But they had arrived to a scene that did not match the order. They saw no screaming woman, no disruption. They saw a quiet, orderly boardroom and a CEO who was conspicuously absent. They looked uncertain, their eyes shifting from me to the committee chairperson awaiting a new directive. No one spoke the word fired again. The word, like the man who had uttered it, had lost all its power. The chairperson, the judge, finally broke the silence. He did not look at me or the guards. He turned to the corporate secretary, who had been silently taking minutes in the corner of the room, her fingers a blur on her keyboard throughout the entire meeting. Ms. Davies, the judge said, his voice a calm, authoritative instrument of order. For the official record, note the time. 10:35 a.m. The committee has reviewed the evidence presented. RECC 12 has been executed. All payment streams to vendor HV 73381 will remain frozen, pending the outcome of a full forensic audit and legal review. It was the official sanitized epitaph for Ronan Vale's career. A few lines of corporate jargon to describe a complete and total immolation. As he spoke, my phone, still face down on the table, emitted a single soft vibration. Not a call this time, a text message. I didn't need to look, but I did. I picked it up. The screen lit up with a notification from a number I had blocked, but whose words could still get through the digital wall as a final desperate plea. Mom, call me. 2 words. 2 months too late. I imagined her pacing the linoleum of that cold kitchen, Gordon raging somewhere in the background. The first tendrils of financial panic beginning to tighten around them. They had finally realized that the silence from my end was not the result of a wound but of a verdict. The call she wanted was not for reconciliation. It was for a lifeline. But the ship had already sailed, and I was the one who had cut the rope. I looked up from the phone, my gaze drifting to the recessed lighting panels in the ceiling. The light was clean white and unwavering. For a fleeting second a memory flickered, the strobing sickly fluorescent light in my mother's kitchen, the dark hairline fracture racing across the community first mug as Gordon's fist came down. For years that memory had been a hot, sharp thing, a shard of glass I couldn't dislodge. But now, under the steady professional glare of the boardroom lights, it seemed distant. The heat was gone. The sharp edges had dissolved. It was just an image, a piece of old data from a corrupted file now overwritten. The memory faded like steam on a cold window, leaving nothing behind. I placed my phone back in my briefcase next to the binder. I stood up my chair, making no sound on the thick carpet. I had my bag. I had my evidence. I had myself. It was all I needed. I looked at the committee members who were now engaged in a low, urgent murmur with their lawyer. I looked at Ivy, a statue of ruin. My final statement was not for them. It was for the record, for the invisible, impartial ear of the minutes being taken. My voice was as calm and clear as it had been from the start. I lost the number, I said. I kept the receipts. With that I turned and walked toward the door. The security guards, seeing me approach, instinctively stepped aside, holding the heavy glass door open for me. They had been sent to remove me, but now they were my honor guard. As the door swung open, the sound of the world outside rushed in the steady percussive rhythm of the rain, hitting the glass and steel of the alder spire. It was a clean sound, a washing sound. The air that flowed into the stuffy, airless boardroom smelled of wet pavement and ozone. The scent of a storm that had finally cleansingly broken. The frame freezes there on my face. It is not smiling. It is not angry. It is not triumphant. It is simply calm, the serene, placid face of an architect who has just watched her blueprints become a reality. The building has been imploded exactly as designed, leaving a clean, empty space where something new can be built. Black screen. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And to help this story reach more listeners, please hit that hype button. Your support means the world.